All right, it's 1 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started because we do have a very full training. We do hope to get you out on time. So welcome to our training. It is our series on supported decision making, and this is the second in our session of 9 months of various trainings about tools that will support people regarding supported decision makings. Next slide. Let's see what we got here, Caitlin.
Oops. For some reason, it stopped presenting right as you said that. So let me cue that back up.
So I'll keep talking while you do that. So this is a collaborative effort between Oakland Community Health Network. We have a local supported decision-making work group who felt it was important to provide education and training so folks understand the various tools that can be used to help promote supported decision-making. And we would never be able to do this without Mary from the Development Disabilities Council, who is super great at getting us speakers and helping us figure out exactly what the most important things are to present about. And she has a cadre of presenters that she helps us pull together. And then also Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, who's helping us get the word out and to make sure that in our community here in Southeast Michigan, folks are learning about supported decision making. So thank you so much for being a part of this session. Next slide. Is it working?
Yes, sorry about that, technical difficulties. So just a bit of housekeeping here. Today's training has been approved for 1 social work CEU. In order to receive that CEU, you must be on the training the entire time. Here, present in Teams, you cannot call in if you need that social work CEU. In order to receive that CEU, you must fill the evaluation out that I will send out at the end of the training in the chat. Even if you're not looking for social work CEUs, we value your feedback that you give us in that eval, and I will also be sending out certificates of attendance if you fill out that eval and request that. So again, I will be sending that eval out at the end of the training in the chat. The chat is either at the top or the bottom of your team screen, depending on what version you have. It's a little bubble with 2 lines through it, so make sure you know where that chat is. We'll be answering questions from there. And again, I'll send out some information in the chat during and at the end of the training. If you have any questions, you can also use the raise your hand feature. So there's a little smiley face with a hand next to it. You can click that to raise your hand, as well as putting any questions in the chat. I did want to let everyone know that today's session is being recorded and it will be available on our website at a later date. And that wraps it up for housekeeping.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Next slide. So again, thanks for attending. I do just want to recognize Mary from the Development Disability Council. Mary, can you turn the screen on and just sort of wave? She's joining us in this training, and she'll be able to answer questions about other areas about supported decision making or what the Development Disability Council does. And I don't see her turning her screen on. There we go.
Say hi, Mary. I have some workmen here working outside of the building, so I'm trying to stay on mute and off screen as much as possible.
Okay, thanks, Mary.
But I'm here for questions, and feel free to share my email address if people want to follow up regarding things.
Mary. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next slide. So our valuable speaker today is Lisa Lepine. Some of us have known Lisa for a very long time, and we really appreciate the expertise and the education that she's willing to provide us about a variety of things, related to supported decision making and other aspects that she is an expert on. But today she's going to talk about how powers of attorney can be used for individuals related to supported decision making. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Oh, look, there's hands clapping. I didn't even know that would work. That's awesome. Okay, we're done already. We're done already. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This is a topic I'm extraordinarily passionate about. And I like to talk super nuclear fast. And the amazing Nikki in my office just brought me yet another cup of coffee. So I might even get in even faster. So if there's ever a time where you need me to slow down or go back over something, please put your hand up in the chat and I'll go back or and try and make sure that I go back over whatever it was that I was speeding by. Caitlin, you manage the up and down, right? Like
Yes,
next
ma'am.
slide. Okay, so let's start with that next slide and talk about human nature. We're going to talk about substituted decision making and ways that we can help people when they're making choices or decisions. And we're going to talk about the legal way that powers of attorney can assist folks in making choices and decisions. But it would be difficult to have this conversation if we didn't address this topic right here, right off the bat, and say that it doesn't matter what legal designation we put in place to assist another person, that person is that person. If a person desires if a person desires a relationship with another human being, if a person likes to do things that are risky or on edge, those folks are going to do those things. We can try to give them the tools to learn differently or to act differently, or we can give them the concept of the dignity of risk, something I'm learning is incredibly important for a 13 and a 15-year-old that live in my house. Make that mistake without mom fixing it. Make that mistake so you know how to do it better in the future. But at the core, people are who they are, and they're going to make their decisions and choices based on their wants, their desires, their needs, and hopefully with some input from those around them to make good choices and good decisions that remain healthy. Next slide, please. So regardless of who we work with and how they process their environment, everyone's going to have different ways to respond to things. And no matter what piece of paper I, as an attorney, or you securing the resources of our attorney or going to court do, people will do what people will do. And what's most important is that this becomes a big issue after someone turns what age? 18, right? As soon as we're 18, we are footloose and fancy free. We can get a car because we can enter into a contract. We can get a credit card because we can enter into a contract. We can get married. At 18, that's the magical age where we're all adults. And if you really, really think about how you were interpreting your environment when you were 18, I think many of us would agree most of our decisions were not necessarily categorized in the adult level of thinking, right? You ever hear that? That's not a very adult decision. I hear that all the time. I still hear it at 52. I don't make adult decisions regularly. As a matter of fact, having this next cup of coffee is not probably the best adult decision I've made, but I'm still going to do it. And I'm going to have, yeah, I know, right? That's crazy. I'm going to do it again. And that dignity of risk is going to be what happens to me after this cup of coffee and this presentation after it, right? So we all do things that put us at risk. And that's an important part, Lori. We rely on people to give us input about how to make decisions and choices. Some of us are very good at allowing others to help us make choices or decisions. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. But at 18, the law decided everyone, no matter what their ability is an adult in the eyes of the law. And it is imperative to understand that the law doesn't say, at 18, if you have a developmental disability, you need a guardian. At 18, if you have mental illness, you need a guardian. The law says nothing about that. The law instead says, at 18, you have the right to make decisions and choices on your own behalf. Next slide, please. What does happen is that for people who interpret their environment a little bit differently, or for people who have challenges with their environment, there are two types of laws that can impact how we might assist them with decision making. The first law that many of us deal with, and I was watching some of the names as they came into the presentation, I saw lots of folks who might be working with individuals with developmental disabilities. And the law that is applicable to people with developmental disabilities is the Michigan Mental Health Code when it comes to what happens after the age of 18. For a person with a developmental disability, The Michigan Mental Health Code dictates in Chapter 6 the alternatives to guardianship and guardianship that are available to give us legal support after someone turns the age of 18. Next slide, please. If you are a person who is helping a senior or an individual with a closed head injury, or you're talking to someone who has mental illness and they do not have a developmental disability, the law that dictates the resources or the types of services or documents that are available to us after the age of 18 is the Estates and Protected Individuals Code. That's really important because whenever we're talking about the law, it's kind of interesting that we have two separate laws for people who process their environments differently. And it's imperative that you know that, because whatever you're choosing for someone, using that standard is how you determine how you might help or assist someone after the age of 18. Regardless of either of those laws, the next slide, please. Both say, no matter what, use the least restrictive means available to you to support someone that are out there. It doesn't say use guardianship. It doesn't say get a guardian. It says use the least restrictive rule, support, whatever's out there to help people with decision making. Case law tells us that, and the law tells us that, meaning statutorily, the statute, the Michigan Mental Health Code, the Estates and Protected Individuals Code, and then the supportive case law from those two laws tells us least restrictive. And we should all be familiar with those terms because it's what we're supposed to do every day anyway, right? Use the least restrictive way to support folks. So what are those ways that we can support people after they turn 18? Next slide, please. Lori alluded to it in the chat. The first is the circle of support. At 18, one way that we can support people is by simply helping them, by trying to assist them with decision making, by giving them information through their circle of support. And look, for a really good example of this would be even in your own lives. Think about it. To get here today, I had to make sure that 2 kids got to school, that I got to the bank before I got here, and I got to the gas station before I got here. That while I was gone from work, someone took care of the dog because it's going to be a long day. While I was on my way to work, I ran into a little situation with the bank where I needed to call, if you can believe it, my mother, for my mom to explain to me what she thought I should do because I wasn't sure how to manage this issue. We all have circles of support and we rely on them regularly. So going back to that human nature issue or that human nature situation, if you have people in your world that are surrounded.
Okay, honey, I'm just watching a presentation.
Hi, someone's not on mute. So when we talk about that circle of support, that's who helps us make decisions or choices about what we do each and every day. Some of those decisions could be huge. For example, you may be going to get a mortgage. How many of you are mortgage bakers in this presentation? I got one. I see one who knows how to be a mortgage banker. But the bottom line is the majority of us would go to a mortgage banker to talk to someone to say, what's a mortgage? How does it work? And we'd rely on the people in our world around us, either maybe a paid attorney or someone who'd already bought a house, to give us some information about what does the percentage rate mean? What does a 30-year fixed mortgage mean? What is an ARM mortgage? Did you ever have a friend or family member that got stuck in an ARM mortgage unknowingly and ended up with a difficulty? We let them make that decision or that mistake because no one said they couldn't. So when you talk about circles of support and how that circle of support is wrapped around an individual, it can help assist us make choices about how we might legally represent them in the community if they need our help and our support. Next slide, please. There are a lot of us who make really, really crappy choices on a regular basis. This cup of coffee is a poor choice on my part. It is absolutely a poor choice on my part. We all make decisions. This morning, I know the only reason I wasn't going 70 miles on 16 Mile Road was I saw the cop. But I was really trying to cook to get my daughter to middle school, right? Because she was going to be late. That's a poor choice. Maybe I'll get her there on time, but who knows if I get in an accident on the way or get a ticket. Does that poor choice equal an incapacity? It absolutely doesn't. It means I'm making a poor choice, and there could be a consequence for that poor choice. But the law tells me I have the right to make that bad decision unless or until I get into a situation where I've done it so many times, they're going to take my license away. So the important piece about serving people who communicate or interpret their communities or their worlds differently than maybe you and I do is that simply because we make poor choices, we're not incapacitated, and we don't have a rule that says that we can't make a bad choice. How many people have you met with a developmental disability that we won't allow make a choice because we think it's a bad one? Right? Oh, that's a bad choice. Is it a bad choice for you or is it a bad choice for that person? So a poor choice doesn't mean an incapacity. It means it's a bad choice, and we all have the right to make bad decisions. Next slide, please. When we talk about choice making, a lot of times it comes down to communication. When we're deciding whether someone has the ability to engage in certain levels of planning for themselves, one of the issues that often comes up is that person's ability to communicate. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from an access center or insert the place you go into CMH services. MCO, I don't know, I don't even know what Oakland County is calling it now, but someone comes to the front door and knocks on the door and says, I'm this person's power of attorney. And the agent says, but the person you're helping can't communicate, so they couldn't have signed it. This is an important and very difficult issue for me because communication comes in so many forms. Behavior is communication, right? That's the first thing we should all learn in this field is that their behavior is communication. Effective communication doesn't mean that a person has to be able to communicate verbally. I have to be able to explain, or you have to be able to explain to a person something about a piece of paper that that person can understand. And the reason that this is so huge is that effective communication is the key. If I'm giving this spiel to you and I'm not effectively communicating to you, you're going to get off and you're going to say, gosh, she didn't do her best job today because I don't understand. I wasn't picking up what she was laying down. I don't understand what she was saying. My communication, one of the pieces that's most difficult for me for Zoom presentations is I can't see all of your faces, right? That's a huge part of effective communication for me because I can see a couple of you and I can see what you're doing, but I can't see everybody. So I don't know if everyone's picking up what I'm laying down. But when I'm in a big room giving a presentation and I'm talking, I can see who's engaged, who's not engaged, who I'm losing, who was never there with me in the first place, and who doesn't want to be there. And not a single word came from my audience. It came in their body language. It came at what they're looking at. It came in how they were responding to the things that I was saying. It comes in the movement when they squirm, when I say something that's not comfortable to them, or I make a faux pas and I say something I shouldn't have said. That is so much more difficult for me on Zoom to determine whether I'm effectively communicating. But I'm still communicating because I'm talking, right? Not if you guys aren't understanding what I'm saying. And that's imperative to understand when we're talking about different ways to support people who learn differently, is that my talking is not communication. It's me talking. What are you getting out of it? What are you hearing me say? And what am I seeing you do in response to that information? All of that is communication, and one half of that communication today is not coming through verbally. So we have to have effective communication by all parties. That may mean that we're not talking at all. We have all kinds of non-traditional communication. Again, all behavior is communication. If someone comes into my office to sit down and talk about alternatives and they're running out of my office, what are they telling me? I don't want to sit in here with you, lady. Something about this place isn't making me happy, or I don't feel safe. Anything you can touch, see, hear, or count is a behavior. And a person's behavior tells us what they think about other people, their lives, and their work. You know, you come to work every day and you're happy to be there. You're probably got a little bit of a smile. You probably say good morning. You're unhappy to be at work every day. You're probably grumbling, right? You're probably not having more coffee than Lisa Lepine. So when you talk about communication, you've got to know, how does a person communicate when we're talking about ways to support them in the community in order to determine what's the best legal way. Next slide, please. Elements of informed consent. I don't know who made this slide, but I clearly need to make the writing on that bigger for my eyes because I can't see it. But the elements of an informed consent are communication of the information, disclosure, the capacity, and the voluntariness. Why is it important? Everybody tells me all the time that I have to get informed consent from somebody, right? I sit down to do a person-centered plan and I have to say, informed consent, right? She can't give informed consent. What is informed consent? The idea or concept is that the person has been given the information in a way that's communicated to them that makes sense to them. Have you done a very good job of giving the information in a way that a person can triage it? I use this example often. When I was younger and I wanted to have children, it was an incredible challenge. And I would go to all these doctors, and there's some argument that, you know, going to school and doing some of the things that I've been able to achieve would say that I have the ability to give informed consent. But when I would talk to these doctors, all I would hear was blah, 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 no baby. And they'd say, here, sign this letter and we'll put you on this medication, or sign this note and we'll do this procedure. And they would talk at me and I would sign and I would walk out of the room, and it would happen time and time again. My best friend's a doctor and she'd say, what are they going to do? And I would say, I don't know. Well, what's the next step? I got to be back next week. What are they going to do next week? I don't know. I signed a form. Was my consent informed? Well, they talked at me. They told me what they were going to do, but I had one goal, and that was to have a baby. They could have put anything in front of me and I would have signed it if I thought that would be my actual ability to have a child. So was my consent truly informed? Certainly they talked and they communicated information, but if they were relying on my ability to understand what they were telling me, my consent was not informed. My consent was driven by emotion. So when we talk about this informed consent piece, there's all these paragraphs that we're supposed to hit. The communication of information, disclosure, the capacity, and the voluntariness, right? Well, I was all those things, but I still didn't understand what was put in front of me. Keep that in mind when you're working with people who interpret their environment differently. It has to be delivered in a way the person can understand it, or it's not valuable to them. Capacity. We're going to talk about capacity a little bit. Next slide, please. It's an ability. It's an ability to understand the information provided and form a reasonable judgment. And there's varying degrees and it's fluctuating. I think I have capacity about a lot of things. And I actually had this conversation quite interestingly with my father yesterday. My father is a Vietnam veteran who is going through various medical concerns and medical issues, and he suffers from PTSD. And he has to go to the hospital where he's kept in a room and he can't leave. I can tell you right now, my father lacks capacity every time they close that door, because his ability to understand the information being given to him is overridden by the fact that he can't open the door. When a person is in a situation where they can't control or take control of, don't feel safe, they're always going to lack capacity, because all you're worried about is what's happening to you. For example, my dad only worries about when they're going to open that door, right? So what do we do in order to help him with his capacity when they're explaining his treatment options? We make absolute certain that the door is open. Absolute certain that the door is open. We don't care who hears his private information 3 hallways down. Open the door. He doesn't care. Second, he's never alone. He's always got someone with him. Why? Because we're all hearing the information differently. And then when the doctor walks out of the room, what do? We explain it to him in a way that he can hear it after the doctor is out of the room. And it takes me and 2 of my sisters and my mother to explain it to him. My dad is a very, very smart and able man. But as soon as he's in a situation where he cannot remove himself, his capacity goes out his ear because he can't understand anymore. So would he be a person or a candidate for guardianship? In that moment, absolutely. He's not able to hear, he's not able to understand, he's not able to comprehend. But what do we do to make it better for his situation is imperative as we make decisions about how we help people who learn differently interpret their environment. Next slide, please. Competence is a characteristic, and this is really important because we presume competency, and that suggests that someone has to be competent in all things. I am not competent at being patient. So am I incompetent completely? Competence is it's not an all or nothing concept. I can't change the oil in my car. I can't change, Lori says, not in my area, in many areas. Absolutely. I can't play an instrument. Does it mean I lack competency? I may not understand certain situations regarding algebra, but I can do geometry. Am I incompetent? I can balance my checkbook, but I can't do algebra or geometry. So remember, these concepts are fluid, and the reason I'm stressing them so very much is, next slide, what are capacities and incapacities? There's legal concepts defined by law, and they're determined by courts or attorneys, not us. It's a dynamic concept. You can have capacity in certain situations and not in others. You can have competencies in certain situations and not in others. It can vary according to your supports that are provided. Have you ever worked with someone who's more able to hear you if they can fidget with something in their hands so that they don't have to, for example, smokers. When you take a smoker and you make them sit for 8 hours without having a cigarette, you think they're going to be able to listen to you after 8 hours if you don't give them a break? And you need to involve other folks who know the person best. Mary tells an awesome story about her brother and how he processes his environment and how they have to help other professionals explain things to him in a way that makes sense to him. Because communication is only effective if the person who's hearing you can understand you. Next slide, please. And the key to everything is that you always presume capacity. I know for a fact that every single professional on this presentation has had a situation or a moment where someone has come to you with a loved one and said, well, they can't do that. They don't have, they're not capacitated. It's a phrase that somehow families or people pick up when they're in school, right? But the law tells me, regardless, that you presume capacity at 18, and the only person who can say that a person is not capacitated is a judge. So if a person with a developmental disability or a mental health issue comes to you in order to say, how can you help me with decision making? What's your first thought? They can do this. We can figure out a way to support this person in a way that doesn't require a guardianship or a power of attorney or anything. We just need to explore what that might mean for this person. So next slide. What is a power of attorney? A power of attorney is a piece of paper that says, I'm giving authority to someone else to help me with something. Okay? So it allows you to give someone authority to manage your affairs. I can say to Vicky, I'm giving you the authority to sell my house. I can say, I'm giving Vicky the authority to sell my house, make all my medical decisions, and decide where I go to rehab. So the length of the power of attorney or the scope of the power of attorney isn't dictated by the term power of attorney, it's dictated by the words that are written into the document. When I appoint someone in a power of attorney to make decisions for me, I'm appointing an agent. I'm saying I'm picking this person to be my agent. What's so cool about a power of attorney is that it's voluntary and it can be changed. So a person can choose or say, I'm choosing this person now. And if the relationship deteriorates or it's not effective later, they can change who's acting as their power of attorney in the future. This all happens outside of a court process, and it relies heavily on the idea that a person has capacity and has the ability to consent to one particular issue. And that's that ability to consent or make a choice about who helps them. Now I'm going off the slide quite a bit because you guys have to get those, whatever they're called. What are they called? ICUs? Tell me the, I lack capacity. I lack capacity right now because I can't think of the term. CEUs.
Social work, CEUs.
Yes, so we have to follow the presentation. And as soon as we get to the end of it, I'm going to riff a little bit and go off of the slides a little bit. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about what this powers of attorney and what makes them legal. And then we'll get to the end where I kind of just riff a little bit and you guys can throw questions at me. A power of attorney by law in Michigan has to be signed and witnessed by 2 individuals and notarized. The definition that you have to meet for sound mind is not defined, but it's a basic average ability. But that basic average ability is not about whether they can read the document, it's about consent. And consent is whether a person knows what right he has and that he wants someone else to have the ability to use that right. We'll talk about that in more detail. If you use a power of attorney, you have to have an agent who signs an acknowledgement of responsibilities. Next slide. Each power of attorney can have a scope. Okay, you can say, I want a power of attorney that impacts all areas of my life, or you can say, I only want it to be over one issue. A durable power of attorney is a power of attorney that remains in effect when you are unable to make your own decisions. Let's talk about that for just a second, because durable power of attorneys, when a person signs a power of attorney, it can be called durable, but you might have a moment where a doctor says you're not capacitated at this moment. If you have a durable power of attorney and a doctor says that, the power of attorney is still effective because it goes past that incapacity. Where do we see that? We see that with folks with mental health issues when they're struggling and they're not able to communicate effectively what they need or how they're interpreting their environment because of what's going on with them. A general power of attorney is effective when you sign it. So I can say right now, I'm appointing Vicky to make all the decisions regarding the sale of my property. And I'm not going to do it at all. I can sit next to Vicky and say, I've signed it and she's signing the mortgage papers. I can give it to her effective immediately. Or I can sign a power of attorney that would spring into action if two doctors said she's not doing well. So the ones that you might see most often in our world would be powers of attorney that were effective upon signature rather than springing, because of the way that the world interprets the people we work with. Okay? Special or limited power of attorney can be used on specific issues. When you pick an agent, and we talked a little bit about, you could do just real estate, you could do just finances, you could do just medical, you could do just hospitalizations. Next slide, please. When you pick your agent, it should be someone you trust. You can do one or two people at a time. You can do one after another. And that agent is.
Hey, Lisa, can I ask you a question about durable?
Mm-hmm.
So with a durable power of attorney, does it only go into effect when I become incapacitated, or is it always in effect even when I'm incapacitated? So if I do a durable power of attorney, it becomes in effect whatever date, and then even when I'm incapacitated, or?
Yes, it's durable means it's in effect whether you're capacitated or incapacitated.
Okay.
Whether it's effective upon your signature or springing dictates when your agent has power.
Okay.
So if you say effective upon signature, it's going to be durable whether you're incapacitated or not, but as soon as you sign it, that person has authority.
Okay.
If you do springing, then it only springs into effect if two doctors say you're in a position and you can't manage your own affairs.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. That helped me clarify it even in my own brain. When you pick an agent, your agent is supposed to do what you would do to the best of your ability, right? And they must act in your best interest. And regardless of who you appoint, they should keep good records, whether they're financial, medical, or otherwise. Then I'll do one last slide, then we're going to riff a little bit about the differences, because then I'm going to really talk fast. The coffee's going to kick in. Patient advocate is a document that's similar to the concept of that you've probably heard, living will. This is the person who says at the end of life, this is the person who's going to determine whether I can make my end of life choices. It's a little bit different than a power of attorney, and I just want to point them out because powers of attorney and patient advocates are different documents and have different signing requirements. So if someone is concerned about end of life choices, a power of attorney isn't going to be the best spot that you put your end of life choices, primarily because of some things that a patient advocate requires an advocate to say that they will or won't do, which are required by statute. So going back to our world where we support people who learn differently, the most important concept when you're working with families is that every single human being at the age of 18 has capacity by law. What documents do, authorizations for release of information, powers of attorney, guardianship, any of those documents do, the only thing they do is they mitigate circumstances. They give someone else the ability to manage on someone's behalf if the individual needs them to or wants them to. And I stress that because there is no place that you can simply get online and check if someone's got a power of attorney somewhere or if someone's got a guardianship somewhere without going to multiple database websites and checking it out everywhere. That goes back to that human nature situation. If I'm going to tell you I have a power of attorney, then you know I have one. But if I don't tell you I have a power of attorney, there's no way for you to know. Just like if you have a guardian, there's no way to know unless you check every guardianship database in the state of Michigan. So how an individual interacts with his or her circle of support is going to weigh heavily on whether that person is going to be a really good candidate for substituted decision making or alternative decision making. Secondarily, no matter what a person chooses, it only works as much as that person works. Communication is key. When I sit down with an individual and say, hey, you'd like to do a power of attorney, or would you like to do an alternative to an alternative to guardianship? The first thing parents say to me is they can't read it, so they don't understand it. The response to that is, that's not their job. My job as the person helping them write the power of attorney is to explain that to them in a medium that they can understand. So and what's really important about this is that that's going to be different for every human being I meet. I did an estate plan review right before I got onto this presentation, and the packet that I sent out to the family was this thick. 2 allegedly able adults sat down with me to discuss it. Do you know how much they read of it? Nothing. They're paying me a lot of money to explain it to them in a way that they understand. Did they have the ability to sign the documents? I think so. They knew who they were. They knew they were safe with one another. And they knew that they wanted one another to help if there was a problem. Question answered. There isn't anyone I've met who learns differently who can't tell me if they feel safe with their caretakers. How many of you have met an individual who shrinks away from somebody and you just know something's not going right? People communicate in all forms. It's imperative to understand that when you're talking about deciding how to support someone, because when we're making decisions and choices about how to legally represent someone in the community, we have to understand that you don't have to read the document in order to decide, I want to do it. You have to have the ability to consent and agree that you understand what's being explained to you. Okay? So let's open it up. Give me questions. Tell me what you want to hear. Tell me what you want to hear about. Tell me your difficult cases where you say, Lisa, you could not possibly do it this way. Anybody?
Well, Lisa, why people are thinking, I had 2 thoughts that maybe you could explain is one, who can create the power of attorney document? And 2, and I wrote it down, who do you give it to, and should you have it like readily available, or like if it's a medical power of attorney, you give it to all your doctors, but also the person who's like designated as your agent. Do you make sure you have that document with you when you go? So you can say, hey, I'm the power of attorney. So, and then we have a hand up after that.
Yeah, so anytime that you're dealing with anybody who has done a document or that you've helped or assisted to do a document, one, I always tell my families, keep them in your glove compartment because you should be able to present them. Okay. I'm not sure that I'm answering your question directly, Vicki, but making sure that all appropriate professionals in someone's lives have them or have copies is imperative.
Yeah, so I guess it's not enough to say, hey, I have a power of attorney to make decisions for this person. You got to show the document.
Yeah, and that's, you know what, and it's imperative that person, I mean, I've had clients who say, I have power of attorney, and you say, produce it, and they say, well, I don't have it. No, you have to have, there's a piece of paper out there somewhere if you have it.
Okay.
So if you can't produce it, maybe we need to redo it.
Yeah. And then who can actually write the power of attorney document? Do you need a lawyer? Can you use
You do not need an attorney to do a power of attorney. It needs to follow state statute. So an effective power of attorney has to have a principal. It has to assign an agent. It has to be witnessed and notarized. And the witnesses have to do 2 people who are not related to the individual who's signing the power of attorney. Okay. So I can, but any of you could write a power of attorney if it had those pieces to it, and it could be very simple. But it has to be witnessed by two people unrelated and notarized.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
I see a hand up and
We got Sherry Kruger and Lori Lindstrom. I'm not sure.
oh, no. Pick others.
I'm gonna fight Sherry. Boom, 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 boom. I'm fighting
We're gonna-
Sherry. I'm gonna go first, Sherry.
Okay.
Go ahead,
All right,
Sherry.
Lori, what's up?
So I wanted to jump in, and I think you had said something about people and obstacles, and there's no way you could move forward with this particular situation because of various things, right?
Right.
So I just wanted to say, without disclosing any PHI, that I have worked with several situations that I think many, many people would say, oh, this is not a candidate for a power of attorney. This is not someone who can use any alternatives to guardianship. I've worked with some families who initially were seeking guardianship and had conversations with them about some of the things you had mentioned, Lisa, about, this isn't a cone that comes down and nothing will ever happen to the person and that they're prevented from making bad decisions, that paper is a magic wand. And after having some discussions, we were able to put some things in place in addition to power of attorney, like all the great and innovative internet things for banking and potentially payees and all sorts of different kinds of supports in place in addition to the power of attorney, where a lot of those parental fears were answered and they felt very comfortable moving forward. And I have had some situations, actually a couple currently, where some people we support who have a whole lot of barriers, we've been able to have good a network of support put around them. They don't have families involved. And I think we have solid ways of having alternatives to guardianship in place to support them very effectively. So I just wanted to be a big advocate for this because I've seen it work really, really well for folks. And I think it's a very good alternative. One question though, before I leave.
Before your question, I wanted to just kind of comment about something. One thing that's really, really important to state and for everybody to walk away thinking about is this. Where in your life have you ever been asked who makes your decisions for you other than in our community where we support people who learn differently? And once you ask yourself that question and you realize, gosh, no one's ever questioned my ability to buy a car other than to check my credit score, or no one's ever questioned my ability to sign a form or a release, you got to think to yourself, something's wrong here. When it's the first question that we have for the people that we serve who learn differently, who's your guardian? So just kind of, I just want to piggyback on what you're saying, Lori, that circle of support and all that help that goes on for folks, it happens in all of our lives. I'm going to go back to the chat after I hear Lori's question. So Lori, what's your question?
So I heard the components that are required, I think you said by state law, for power of attorney. I know I have seen other power of attorneys who don't follow all that, and I've seen them accepted. I'm going to assume that they're accepted by medical professionals and other legal folks, and because they just don't know that it has to have those other components.
That would be my presumption, because the state law requires the two witnesses, and the notary.
Okay.
Okay, and the acceptance from the agent saying they'll do the business. I should add that as well. Going back to the chat, oops. Oh, there it is. Okay. I was recently told that a patient advocate form trumps a durable power of attorney, even though the power of attorney is effective over medical immediately. Patient advocate form states it's not in effect until the patient advocate is unable to participate in medical decisions. Can you elaborate on this? I absolutely can. You have to read both documents to see how they work together and how they function with one another. Most powers of attorney that have medical authority in them speak to medical issues that are happening during life, and patient advocates come into play when an end of life choice is being made and a person can't communicate their decisions regarding end of life. So again, with all of these documents and all these terms that are being thrown around, one of the key components is you have to read each of the documents to know or understand what they're saying before you can say what trumps what. So they got to be looked at together to make a decision. When does this apply and when does this one apply?
There's one other thing in the chat there.
Yeah, I didn't see that one. Oh, I see it.
Okay.
When the parents have power of attorney over their VD adult child who signs paperwork like PCPs, is that the one?
Yes.
It depends. I love depends. It always depends. If the power of attorney is effective at the time the individual signs it, then the persons who are named agent have the authority to sign the person-centered plan.
Is that if they're only over the medical services?
No, it's actually contractual, Vicki, because a PCP is a contract.
Okay.
Okay. It's a contract to provide a medical service, right? So you want to make sure, and that's a really good point though. You want to make sure the power of attorney has the right authority in it, but you also have to look at when it was effective. My experience with people using powers of attorney is that people who like to use powers of attorney also want to respect their loved one and will also allow their loved one to sign the PCP. But the legal authority is vested in the person who's got the contractual authority at the time the document is in place, meaning the PCP. Okay? I see a hand up, but I can't tell whose it is.
So we got Sherry Kruger's hand still up.
Sherry Kruger, your hand's still up. Hi, Sherry Kruger.
Hi, Lisa. Now I have many questions,
Okay.
but let's start with the one I wanted to start with. Do you have any suggested language where we're running into challenges is the medical community
Yes.
and their interpretation of an individual's abilities to manage and self-direct their life? And they get quite adversarial very easily. So it would be helpful to have maybe some suggestions of how we could navigate that successfully on behalf of someone.
Well, my first answer is always, did your legal team take a look at this yet? Because usually it's the doctor's office itself making a presumption the individual didn't have the ability to sign. Okay, so that's the first issue. The second issue is that that's one of the reasons when parents do powers of attorney or families do powers of attorney or they fill a form online that they can be somewhat of a difficulty, right? Because my next answer is, if I did it, you better be telling them call my lawyer because she'll explain it to you. The way that I usually explain it when a doctor's office calls me is to say, the law tells me that this individual had capacity at 18 and they had the ability to sign this in a way that they understood it. They were in my office, they presented, I followed the law in drafting it and in executing it. There is no legal impropriety or difficulty here. If you'd like me to speak with your attorney, I'd be happy to do so. Usually that addresses it for people that I'm dealing with. And if their counsel gets involved, it's a little bit easier because then you can go to the law and say, this is what the law says.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that one of the challenges with powers of attorney is sometimes that they require more advocacy from us than what we have in us. You know, sometimes when you're just tired, it's hard to argue with folks, right? But the answer would be, the law tells me we can, and here's where it is. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, we have a Sam. Someone signed in as Sam has their hand up.
Yeah,
Hello.
sorry, this is Jill. I was signing on last minute and I realized my son's name was in there and I didn't have a chance to change it. My question is from the parent perspective. A lot of times I think parents, they're concerned, they feel safer with guardianship. And I love that you're speaking on this because I think it's such a great topic and it was really helpful. But from that nervousness with power of attorney, how vulnerable, have you seen situations, because then if they gave power of attorney to their parents, which is what we have in our situation, then what if someone got them to sign a power of attorney after ours? How would that play out, or how would you alleviate parents' fears that could happen?
Well, again, it goes back to that circle of support, and how likely is it that your loved one's going to be taken from one attorney to another without that family involved? And you have to look at a totality of the circumstances. So I'd start with that. How many people do we really get involved with that don't have a strong circle of support or strong family support?
Mm-hmm.
those are times when we have to really look at that circle and how do we build it stronger so that a situation doesn't occur where a person taking advantage of someone takes them attorney shopping. Okay. So again, it's a case by case basis. The secondary issue that I have to say about that is that can happen with guardianship too. You can get someone who thinks they'd be a better guardian than a parent, and they can walk into court and file a petition, and the petition can go all the way through the process without even notice to the parents because the family, they don't send it, and boom, you got a new guardian. That's not what keeps people safe. What keeps people safe is being involved in their loved ones' lives.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's always like the concern. Parents feel like, you know, when they'll come to me, you know, they feel safer with guardianship. And so that's a good.
Hello.
Yeah.
I appreciate your response.
Hello.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Josie, is that you?
Yes.
You have a question?
Yes. As far as the durable power of attorney with a strong circle of supports for those with severe developmental disability, and I'm raising this comments and concern because the former board president of OCHN was instrumental strongly during Kathleen Kovach's time. That's why we have supported decision making. This former board president had a severe developmentally disabled child, like my child, but then she was able to have her daughter be put in a durable power of attorney with strong circle of supports. Likewise, my former privately hired autism consultant, Dr. Sally Borton Hoyle, she functioned in the capacity of power of attorney through for her late brother. These two cases were strongly advised and supported by Mr. Don Hoyle, the husband of Dr. Sally Borton Hoyle. My comments and concern is that if these two individuals are severely disabled, like the first one I mentioned, the former board president of OCHN, she passed away, but the parents were able to begin with without guardianship, just a durable power of attorney. My concern is that with my daughter, who also severely disabled, like these two individuals, what in the point of medical decision as just to be one of the strong circle of support is the physician, because all the physician will do is just make sure it's stamped. And that bothers me because I think that is immoral, because on the healthcare, I am a healthcare worker. In essence, for a physician to do that just because the parents were able to create a strong circle of support, I think I question about licenses of this position.
Well, I think that Josie, that goes back to the question of what works best for each individual, and that's why it's something that everybody has to make a choice about based on what's going on in their life for their family member.
Yeah, like the former president of the board, you know, was invited to one of our supported decision making, and she had really presented her late daughter's case. Mm-hmm. And up to this point, it bothers me if one of the decisions is one of the strongest circle of support, how could that be done? The daughter passed away.
Yeah, I you know, she's referring to Judy Summers, who's our board chair, who's been very vocal about that they've always used different types of tools to support their daughter without moving into guardianship, and that was a decision that their family made, and they made it work. She talks about how they really didn't have any difficulty related to medical issues or other types of issues because they had the right tools in place and they had a strong circle of support. And I would imagine that they Probably, part of their circle was her doctor. She probably had doctors that were a part of her life for a very long time. And so knew her and knew the family. So that was something that worked very well for Judy and her daughter family.
And
So,
yeah, Dr. Sally Borton Hoyle's late brother too. These
Yeah.
two cases were strongly supported by Don Hoyle.
yeah. So it's I think Lisa said it's what best works for the individual, what best works for the family or that circle of support. Lisa,
Thank
did you
you.
have some final thoughts on that?
I was just
Any
checking in with Sherry whether to see if she had additional questions after we. Sherry Kruger, did you have another question?
I did. You had mentioned that power of attorney, legal decision making would cover the services received from the PIHP. And I've also heard the interpretation that it would be medical decision making because of the Medicaid funded piece of the PIHP services. So I was wondering, for my sake, I don't know if anybody else is interested in this, if you could expand on that a little bit.
So to me, the person-centered plan itself is the contract that dictates the services or the scope, but the authorization is what actually gives you the prescription for the actual Medicaid covered services, right? So to me, the person-centered plan is the equivalent of an individualized education plan, which is a contract. Okay. So it's not, you're defining length, scope, and duration, and you're making a request. And that legal document is being submitted to someone else to say, now we're going to give you this equivalent Medicaid covered service. We all know how to define CLS and respite because of what we do. But technically, a person-centered plan could be written in such a way that we never talked about CLS or respite or anything for Medicaid. The plan could be submitted and interpreted by the MCO, we call it MCO Macomb, whoever your authorizing party is, and they're going to give the attributing or equivalent Medicaid covered service. So the person's centered plan would be, to me, a contract.
So what would it need to be in the power of attorney to have a person's agent be over that?
I would require contractual language.
Okay.
And I would require, now again, if you're doing a power of attorney that either I wrote or Patty Dudek wrote, it's going to have legal, financial, and contractual in the same one.
Okay.
Legal,
Gotcha.
financial, and medical. I'm sorry, I didn't do the fourth one. I was counting and I was like, what's missing? What's missing? It's the medical one that you need. So again, it goes back to the scope of the document. But if the document says, if it's a simple power of attorney and says, my agent can talk to my doctors, that's not enough to sign a person-centered plan.
I would agree, Lisa. I guess I was thinking, would you then need the medical for the consent to treatment for behavioral health treatment, and then the legal to sign agreement or acceptance of the IPOS is what I'm understanding you to say?
That's how that's how I would agree that's how I'm explaining it. And the follow-up to that though, when we talk about powers of attorney, now this is imperative and this is going to blow it all up and it's 204. You ready for this? The scope,
Lisa.
Yes! The scope of the power of attorney dictates the authority that's given to the agent. Okay?
Yeah.
The scope of the guardianship dictates the power that's given to the guardian. So if the power is not given to the legal agent appointed in either of those situations, who holds the power?
The individual.
The individual.
Yeah.
So if you have the power of attorney sign it and the individual sign it, you covered all your bases, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask one more question?
I don't know if they'll let me keep talking, but I will always talk forever.
One quick one, and then we got to finish up.
Okay. The other thing you mentioned was, again, it's my interpretation that if I were to enter into a power of agreement, I'm saying you can sign on my behalf, but does that mean I legally can't sign my documents?
They gave the authority to the agent, yes. It's not shared. You're giving it
Okay.
away.
And I have heard a different interpretation that,
I've heard it differently interpreted as well. That's why you really
Okay.
got to read what documents you have in front of you. Because
Okay.
the idea is to respect the individuals that are involved or engaged in the power of attorney. They kind of think it's hanging back there just to be there in case.
mhm.
But remember, we're substituted decision making. If we're giving that authority away, we've given it away. If we're retaining it, we're retaining it. Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Sherry, you got my number and my email.
I do, Lisa, I do.
Please feel free
All right.
to call or email me with any questions that didn't get answered, and I appreciate you listening to me. I know Zoom isn't always the easiest for me, but I appreciate you guys.
So Caitlin, maybe you could put Lisa's email in the chat, or Lisa put it in the chat. Just somebody's asked in the chat, acceptance of an appointment is also needed to secure a POA, and the answer is from Lisa, yes, you also need to accept. So the appointee, the agent has to accept that. All right, Lisa's email is in the chat. Just a reminder, this is a series. Our next series will be on April 26th. We're going to be talking about ABLE accounts. There's been some recent changes, how you can start one and what they can be used for is related to some financial stuff. Next slide. As Caitlin mentioned, we are recording all these sessions and they can be found on our website, and currently this is where you can find them. We are in the process of updating our website, so things at some point will change, but right now I think you can still find them at this location. And next slide. And thank you for attending. Just a reminder, if you want social work CEUs, you do need to complete the survey, and we really would appreciate the survey completed by all folks who are attending. It helps us with our planning, helps Mary with some data gathering that she's doing for her project at the Development Disability Institute. Thank you for attending. Great questions, great information, Lisa. We so much appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We hope to see you in April.